graduation of 5 ceremonies today.
Oh my goodness.
It's fabulous though.
I was going to say, that must
Campus
be
is
nice after the
full
last
of
couple of years.
lovely students, and you know, they didn't get a ceremony in like July 20. I think November 2019 was probably the last one we did.
Wow.
So that's
Was that why town was so good? I was in town earlier and the centre, I was like, oh, this is amazing, there's all these people.
They had them at Wakefield, for Wakefield Uni, but it was the same day as the Rhubarb Festival.
Oh.
So it was the town centre, like, you could not move because there's like all of these students.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second Lent Life panel conversations for our town. Tonight we have a fab panel and we're going to talk about inclusion. If you're watching from home, please do put any questions that you've got into the live stream. It's being watched, so we'll get your questions. So welcome to you that are here, welcome to anybody who's watching from home, and welcome to our panel. A few things to say before we start. Just to say, welcome to St Peter's Parish Church. Really nice to have you all here. The toilet, if you need the toilet, is to the back of the church and that way. Sorry, not sure which is left and which is right. Right, thank you, Warden. And we are going to make a start. So I'm going to introduce the panel. We've got Catherine Alice Gresham. Catherine is a disabled LGBTQ plus Christian who works for the Diocese of Leeds as Disability Officer and Children, Young People and Families Mission Training Lead. They also run 2 LGBTQ plus inclusive youth groups around West Yorkshire and live with their partner and 2 cats. Their background is in the arts and they are passionate about all kinds of inclusion. So welcome, Catherine Alice.
Thank you.
Then we've got Hannah McKirker. Hannah was born in Huddersfield and has spent most of her life living in Kirklees. She currently lives in Skelmanthorpe with her husband, 2 young children and her cat. Cat theme tonight. She loves where she lives, playing an active role in village life as a community volunteer and a school governor, as well as getting out onto the local footpaths and enjoying the countryside that we're lucky to live in. Hannah likes baking cakes, but she has to give them away, otherwise she would eat them all herself. She also likes singing folk songs, even in public on occasion, so ask for a song at the end. She's a humanist, and that feeds into her work as a humanist celebrant, leading personal, non-religious ceremonies such as funerals, weddings and naming ceremonies, a job she finds incredibly rewarding. And welcome to Professor Jane Owen Lynch from the University of Huddersfield. I know you get a professor there. She's Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Huddersfield, responsible for the student experience as well as teaching and learning developments. Jane also has a distinctive multidisciplinary portfolio of research activity. Brace yourself for this, because it's properly impressive. Based in biochemistry, but spanning across collaborations in physics, psychology and biology. Linked with this event, Jane is chair of the university's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Enhancement Committee and is leading on the Athena Swan agenda, which she might tell us about in a bit, and the Race Equality Charter. These are quality charter marks which recognise an organisation's commitment to and progress on equality and diversity in particular gender and race. Jane is also a key participator in the university's Race Equality Week, Inclusion Week and International Women's Days events. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you.
And Xavier Stringer Murray is a fourth-year student at Theological College, studying with the aim to become a minister in the future. He's also a transgender man and came out at the start of Pride Month last year. Since then, he's been happier and more comfortable in himself and in his faith. Xavier recently moved to Huddersfield and has become an active member here at St Peter's. So welcome to the panel. Let's give them a round of applause and I should probably introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Reverend Amanda. I'm the curate here at St Peter's, Huddersfield. So I'm going to attempt to facilitate tonight. Mark's at the end. So we're going to start with the panel are going to give us a little bit of their perspective on inclusion to start us off, and then we'll open up for some questions. So can I start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone, thank you for having me on this panel. It's really
in embracing and celebrating their own identity, regardless of ethnicity or gender, sexual orientation, religion or belief, or any other characteristics, those protected under the Equalities Act, but also any others that form a strong part of their identity. So in looking towards the future for ourselves and for our children, the best way I can see to create a more empathetic, more peaceful, a happier society is to make that future as inclusive as possible. Karl Popper, a rationalist philosopher, spoke of tolerating everything except intolerance. But I hope we can do more than that, more than tolerate the differences between us. I hope we can celebrate them, create a world in which each of us can flourish as our true selves.
Thank you, Hannah. Jane.
Hello everybody, good evening. I'm going to take a slightly different tack by a kind of series of just snippets of anecdotes about things that we do, things that I've learnt, things that I've seen. I think for myself, inclusion first came to the fore in my brain when I was the first woman in basically an all-male environment at work. That was very strange. But by the time I left that environment, there were 6 of us. And I think one of the things that does is it gives me hope. And it suggests that things are moving. And this whole idea of inclusion, diversity, recognition is coming to the fore. My daughter, when she was at 15 years old at high school, was told that it wasn't usual for girls to do science. And interestingly enough, the teacher that said that to her was male, you won't be surprised to hear. And my daughter turned round to him in complete honesty, not meaning anything particularly aggressive, and said, "My mother is going to kill you." and I think that's an example of where we can engender this inclusivity and think about it and talk to our children and make them understand the difference. When I moved to Huddersfield, I brought the same daughter with me, and she started at Greenhead College. And bear in mind that previously to coming to Huddersfield, we lived in Wigan. Now, if you walked through Wigan, then it's highly unlikely that you would see anybody from a black or minority ethnic background of any nature. And when you come to Huddersfield, it's completely different. And she went to school and she came back from Greenhead College and she said, "I've met all these people. There's all sorts of wonderful things going on. They think about this and they do this in their societies and their cultures are different." And everything she told me was like a revelation to her about the diverse cultures that are there. And then when we went back to Wigan and she met her friends and she was telling all of her friends, they were, "That's very strange, they knew nothing of this." And actually that brings me on to one of my fundamental principles, I think, around diversity and inclusion is that it's about education. We had a speaker at the university recently who was talking about racism. And he said, and I thought this was a really good analogy, that effectively most of racism and most of this lack of inclusion in society is about a lack of education. And so if we have these sorts of events, we talk to each other, we look at this education piece, then hopefully by the actions and the words that we do, we can go forward. Now at the university, as I was introduced, we talked about the Athena's 1 Charter that deals with gender. We talked about the Race Equality Charter that deals with race. We have the Stonewall system that deals with LGBTQ+. And all of these different charters are all there. We have the Disability Charter and disability marks. And I think they're great in their isolation, but actually what they don't do is they don't look at the holistic viewpoint. They don't look at the intersectionality. They don't look at the whole person. And I think going back to something that my colleague here on the left, Catherine, was saying, it's about looking at everything linked together. And hopefully through the education of our children from primary school right the way up to university, we can include some of that picture. I'll leave you with one final thought. We had another speaker at the university. We've had quite a few recently because it was Race Equality Week. And one of the things that they said was they start with 100%. You meet somebody and you give them 100 out of 100. And then, once you've got to that 100 out of 100, you accept that. And it's only if they do something drastic to you, something you don't like, whatever it is, that you would ever think about reducing that score. So you don't look at a person and you don't decide who they are, what they are, where they fit. You just give everybody 100 out of 100 and carry on with the relationship that way. I could talk a lot more, but I'll be quiet because Xavier needs to go next.
Hello everyone, my name is Xavier. I am a transgender Christian. I am disabled. I have various neurodivergencies, autistic, ADHD, and much like Catherine Alice, I have also been subject to a lot of discrimination in my life, a lot of bullying, and that's actually formed my worldview in a way. Except instead of seeing people as hateful and cruel, which is what I experienced, in a strange way it made me believe in the inherent goodness of people.
A lot of groups are set up for 16 to 25-year-olds, but for the mid-40s men that are coming out, it's a struggle.
Thank you, Richard. Would anybody like to... Catherine Alice, do you want to start with that?
I think that's such a good point that that we do tend to give a lot of stuff about inclusion towards younger people. I think part of the reason for that is, certainly for me anyway, I feel very hopeful that those are going to be the people who are going to make the change. And so if we do as much for them, then hopefully they will lift us all up. But absolutely, that shouldn't be at the exclusion of other people, and I think finding spaces that are inclusive, age-wise as well, can be more difficult. But they are out there, and so there are lots and lots of charities who run sort of local support groups. Obviously, through church, there might be things kind of going on here. They're looking at starting up an open table service in Bradford. And if you've not come across Open Table, it's a very inclusive, LGBT inclusive church movement, and it's very open to all ages. I used to go to the one in Liverpool, and I was one of the youngest there. It was mostly people around your age who, like you say, sometimes get missed out. And actually, it was a really great place to focus on giving something to you. So hopefully when things like that get off the ground, and I'm seeing, like more recently, I'm seeing more things like that springing up. So there is stuff out there, and there are people who can help you look. I'm sure Amanda and Rachel can help you do that in church, you know, and I'm certainly happy to have a conversation with you about some of the local stuff as well. But they're definitely, please don't feel that you're not wanted in those spaces, because you absolutely are. Sometimes it's just about finding the right ones.
Would anybody else like to chip into that? Anybody else got anything they want to add?
Just that I'm really glad that you've reached the point where you have found yourself comfortable in your own identity. And I mean, I don't know the resources locally, but I'm hopeful that now that you are comfortable with yourself, that you will find those inclusive spaces. You're obviously in one now, but that there will be others. Because I think age is often something that does get overlooked in terms of, even in terms of the protected characteristics in the Equalities Act, that age is not considered to be as important to take into account, and that's not true. It should be. And like I say, you know, I'm hopeful for your onward journey.
Richard, we are doing some stuff at the minute here. So we'll have a chat at the end, and anybody else we're running LLF, the Living in Love and Faith course. We're doing that, but we've said every week, although we're running that for our under 30s at the minute, but that came out, but that... We can fit you in. No, I'm teasing. But we did that because we've already done it for the oldies. Joking, everyone. We've already done it for the older people, and an action point of that was to specifically run it at 18 to 30. But every single week that we've advertised that, we have said, if you're interested in doing this, come and tell us, because we are now at the point where we've got enough people where we will run that again. So talk to me and come and do it. And there's some other things that we're looking at doing. So, yeah. Anybody else got any questions? Come on, because it's going to be a right short night if you don't.
Hi there. My name's Stu Derby. I noticed you mentioned Greenhead. I'm Vice Chair of Governance up at Greenhead. There we are. With the world. I'm always a great fan of Bishop Tutu. I think he has some great quotes. And I had to use one of them recently in another part of the work I do. And I come across one here I was reminded of. Differences are not intended to separate, to alienate. We are different precisely in order to realise our need for one another, which I think is a great Christian concept, our need for one another. The question I'd like perhaps to comment on, inclusion is a great word, but we tend to refer to inclusion as being there is a majority who are similar, the same in any way, and then we talk about inclusion of others, so it's inclusion of black, brown, gay, yeah? But there seems to be a line in which we say, well, they're already included in, and we need to bring others in. So the question for me is, where does that kind of line come from? That some people are in and some people are out, and how do we destroy that line?
Who wants to start?
Do you want me to start with that one? Thank you. Thank you for the work with Greenhead. She loved it there. It was a fantastic place. So that's great. For me, it's about destroying the line. And I think, we think about inclusion and we talked about intersectionality and all of those different characteristics. And one of the things that we do as an exercise is with a large group of students when they join us, when we're trying to break down these types of barriers, is we have them in a room and we say, okay, so what are we thinking about in terms of characteristics? And they all write down the characteristics that they're thinking about. But actually then you ask them questions and you say to them, okay, so how many of you live north of the university and how many of you live south? And you can split them that way. And then you say to them, how many of you have a brother? How many of you have a sister? How many of you have both? And you can split them into different groups. And we do this, all different characteristics. How many of you have favourite colour of blue? How many of you prefer red? And you can do all of this. And as you go through the exercise, you can do this for quite a while.
Given that a number of you have talked about the importance of education, and it's 11 years plus since the Equality Act came in, which was preceded by the Disability Act for a good number of years. Don't you find it distressing that you're having to do some of the work you're having to do? I'm thinking particularly, you've talked about the work you're doing at the university, that people are coming, young people are coming to university
and still needing educating in these sort of matters. What is happening and where are the lobby groups to actually achieve structural change? Because until we've got change in society, the acceptance of everybody's differences, however they are, isn't going to be normal. And is that not what we need to achieve what I think we're trying to achieve? Thank you.
Who would like to speak to that?
I feel guilty for starting again, but obviously we're talking about this from the context of education. I think that, I've been at universities now since I was, since I joined one at the age of 18, and then I carried on to work there. I would say that if I take that whole time span, things are an awful lot better. And that's what I'm thinking, what I was saying before about the sort of time span for this. There are no quick fixes. And I know, we've been through a cycle of, for example, on the gender issue, there was lots of things where they used to have programs for making women more assertive, and doing training in this for women and training in that for women. And gradually that obviously came round to the point of view which was, well, actually, no, let's, as Xavier was saying, leave them where they are. They're quite happy with the characteristics that they have. They're a great benefit to society. And so now that programme of work has changed considerably around acceptance and cultural awareness and everything else. And then, so I think, I understand what you're saying, but from my point of view, this is a slow process. And when I think of the distance travelled, it is considerable. It's not enough, not by a long way, but that distance travelled is considerable. I also think from the perspective of the university here, it's very diverse. And it's diverse linked with the diversity of the town and the local environment. And actually, in that context, compared to other institutions that I've worked on, it works really well. And the students tend, on the whole, to have that cultural awareness. So I think, the education piece is working, but it's not working as fast as we might like. But if you can get to the majority, then ultimately that's when you can drive the change. As I said before, all these different charter mats help, but ultimately what we have to do, I think, is we have to train our students to call it out. It's not just enough for them to be aware of it, for them to be aware of their own misconceptions, unconscious biases, whatever. We have to train the students and the population to call it out, because if we do that, and if we all actively try and do that, then gradually the whole piece will that sort of cultural awareness will spread. But I understand exactly what you're saying, and sometimes I feel like it's like banging your head against a brick wall, I really do. But the distance that we've travelled is actually considerable, I would say, from my experience in education over the last 30 odd years. I'm showing you my age now, aren't I? But yeah.
I think it's a difficult one because I completely agree with you, like we have come a really long way, but it feels very slow and it's still very frustrating, and I feel that every day as a disabled person. I think the other thing in the Equality Act, certainly in the disability part of it, talks about an anticipatory duty to think ahead and accommodate for needs ahead of them arising. And I think that's perhaps where we're not as good. We're definitely better at putting out fires and kind of dealing with issues when they come up, but not as much. And I think that sort of structural stuff that you were saying, putting those things in place. So like you say, our Equality Act now is 12 years old, the Disability Discrimination Act is 15 years old before that, and that actually there's a lot that could be changed again, and these things do take so much time. But I think I agree with you, and I think also, like you were saying, this generation that is coming up, and like what I was saying, 16 to 25-year-olds, they give me so much hope. It's why I love doing youth work. And so one example that I can think of is on TikTok, which is a very popular social media platform, particularly with that age group. It's very, very common practice for people to subtitle their videos, and they've just learnt to do that, not necessarily for anyone in particular, but they've learnt that as a habit, because people might need subtitles on their videos, and that's such a great example of that sort of anticipatory duty. And so I think, again, like it's about bringing all of that in, getting people, and I think habits as well, building habits that last. And I think one of you guys are saying, you know, about inclusion isn't just something we do, like it's something we need to build into everything that we are. So the more that we can do that, and you know, that's just one example, but the better things will get, and the quicker they will get better, I think.
And I think I think what's needed is that it becomes the default, instead of it being, like I said, not to make it, it's not something to be ticked off. It has to be a way of being, and I think to then be the person to try and explain to them is a very big ask. And you know, it's the allies around who should be doing the work, who don't have that kind of personal pain to deal with, who can try and express and educate and, like you said, give people a chance to it's sort of certainly call out behaviour that isn't acceptable, but with a space that gives somebody a chance to grow, not in a space that makes them feel rejected and defensive and shut down and stick with what they always thought anyway. You've got to have a conversation and give somebody somewhere to go away and think, and potentially that's where the change comes, I think.
Thank you so much. Anybody else got any questions? Richard, because you've had one, can I have one first? I was just going to ask, kind of following on from the conversation that we've just had, so we at St Peter's are an inclusive church, and we're really proud of that, and that's why we're really proud to be having this panel tonight. But because of historic and because of the perceptions outside, sometimes it's really hard to get people to believe that this is a safe place to be, and I think that happens in all kinds of different places and different spaces. And I just wonder, we want to be an inclusive church, we feel we are an inclusive church. There are other organisations who probably want to be inclusive, but if you are judged to be somewhere where people are wary because of past experience, or how do you change that perception so that people genuinely feel that you're inclusive and a safe space?
I think part of it is about being very explicit about where you stand. I think particularly when it comes to churches, a lot of churches will say everyone's welcome, but in my experience that's not always true, and that's too vague. So sometimes you have to be very explicit. You have to say, we welcome all people, we welcome LGBT people, we welcome people of colour, we welcome disabled people, autistic people, and to name those things, because I think there's a real power in that, and also if you don't, that vagueness is a barrier in itself. And I think you know, there's lots of ways you can do that. So you can do that on, you know, your website, on the front of your building, if you have signage, you know, if you're feeling colourful, you know, you have some rainbow flags up in your church, and if people can see them, they're going to know immediately that is a safe space. You know, if your leadership team share their pronouns regularly in emails or when they're talking or whatever that is, then again, that's how people know that it's a safe space. And sometimes that is a sacrifice, because it can alienate some people and it can put some people off. But again, coming back to, like, you know, having those conversations, you know, that's a very non-confrontational way of opening things up, hopefully. And so yeah, being obvious about it.
Thank you. Any other?
I would kind of build on that really, because I totally agree with what you're saying. You know, you can make the statement, but the statement means nothing if it's not overtly obvious. And so, going back to again, just to reinforce the point, a typical example is we do this thing called a #NeverOK campaign. And it was an interesting thing because it says, you know, it's never okay to be racist, it's never okay to be transphobic, it's never okay to be ageist, you know, and then there's a whole absolute plethora of these, and people in the university, it was quite interesting because it was like, well, this is too much. And actually, I think it isn't too much because it's basically taking everything together and saying none of this is okay, and that's why we are this inclusive environment. And I think that type of visibility is what you need. You don't just need to say we are an inclusive space. You need to have that obvious acceptance. Through whatever, whether it's the flags, whether it's the social media or whatever, you have to have that obvious acceptance of everybody. And I think, you know, another example is the pictures. You know, I mean, what does your website have on it? Does it have images of just white parishioners? Does it have a mixture? How does all of that work? And what's the imagery around the place as well?
Fab, thank you so much.
Can I come in? Yeah, so it's something that, so I don't know if you would be aware, so I'm a humanist in terms of my worldview, but I also choose to be a member of Humanists UK, which is the national group who campaign on behalf of the non-religious. And it's something that they are working on at the moment. I'm trying to be part of that conversation. Because they're very aware that they are seen as a sort of white middle class organisation. They have a very strong LGBT humanist group. So in some aspects, they're very good at inclusivity, but definitely in others, we're not doing it right. But it's definitely a priority, and one of the things that when they did their consultation that came up was exactly that, was visibility, was if somebody comes to your website and does not see anything of themselves reflected back, they will go to another place. They won't even.
It's, you know, not just me alone, is it? But I would bashed over head being there with a Bible, like Leviticus, do not sleep with a man, type talk in some places, not in this place. But then general messages that come out on social media from some of the top of the church don't necessarily feel inclusive because they're either doubtful or they're not clear enough that they are inclusive. So I'm out in the real world saying I'm a bisexual Christian, I'm alright with God, he loves me, he's created me, that's alright, I'm great with that. But people say, yeah, but look at people above you, they're saying, we're not quite sure. When's the church going to come out and say we include everyone?
I think that's one of my biggest frustrations. Lovely, amazing guy, and now he's retired, and I accept that he needed to do that for himself, but for us, very cross and hurt, because who's gonna step up in his place? I don't know. Maybe people will, and I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but right now it feels very quiet. And that can be quite scary. I think the only thing to hold on to is the living love and faith process, which is not perfect by any means, but is a chance for people in churches to have their voices heard by people at the top. And I've been involved with that process the whole way, not quite the whole way along, but for a couple of years now. And I know that people are starting to really pay attention to what's being said there. The report's going to be put together after the end of April, where the kind of deadline closes, and there's been lots of research done in lots of different ways there, and so I really hope that will, the people who are inclusive but who aren't saying it, that will make them sit up and say it.
Thank you. Can I go to this last question so I can fit it in?
Does the diocese offer training to churches on the LGBTQ subject? Because we've all trained on safeguarding issues, and we know about that. I do think there's just a lot of ignorance. So many churches are filled with quite grey hairs, and I know myself, I'm very liberal-minded and very inclusive. I can see that there's this gap with one of the age groups. And it's not because we don't want to, it's just we just don't know. Some of the vocabulary you've used tonight, I've heard it. I don't know what it means. And there's this, perhaps you're younger people assume we know these things, we don't. We want to, but it's just quite new to us over the last 15 years. Because when I was a teacher, we weren't even allowed to promote homosexuality. It was such, it's come such a long way in a very short time.
Yeah.
In my age, yes, amazing to see my life has changed. My daughter's gay, she's in a long-term relationship, over 20 years, and she's her diversity champion in her company. And son's married an Indian girl, my grandchildren are, yes, half Anglo-Indian. And I was a Quaker for a long time. I do see God in everybody, but I feel the Church of England somehow has got, I assume we know these things, but I don't think we do. I think it'll train you. If I was to come to this church, I don't come very often, how do I know that you are really inclusive? Are there posters? Are there meetings? I can't see any rainbows or anything that says that.
Don't worry, the start of the conversation.
The honest answer is at the moment, no. There has been some quite informal stuff going on, mostly through the education team. So I've been doing some training for the chaplains, but nothing that's been offered widely. I have been pushing for it, and I do think it will come. Again, I think it's part of the very slow process. But I think also with living a love and faith as well, there was a big assumption with that, which I think was one of its biggest flaws, that people just knew what all the issues were and what we were talking about. And actually, like you say, that's not the case. You know, even when I was in school, Section 28 was still in place. Not through my whole school life, but even when it was repealed, it didn't magically mean that we were all talking about these things. And so actually there isn't an awareness of these issues at all. And I think the church is trying to have a conversation over here when we're still actually over here. And I'm hoping that will come out from the LLF process, and I'm hoping that will be then responded to and that things will start to come out in the next few years. But I don't know, is the honest answer. I will keep fighting for it as much as I can, and there are some resources out there that do more of that kind of education stuff, which Living in Love and Faith doesn't do. But yeah, the honest answer is no. We don't have anything in this diocese. There are probably maybe 2 dioceses in the country that do. In the Church of England, one of the Church of Wales dioceses, I think it's Llandaff, have an LGBT chaplain, and I think Oxford Diocese have an LGBT chaplain, so they may do some LGBT training, but it's not common, and I think it should be. Yeah, absolutely. For our clergy, for everybody, and as you say, you know, it's something that we should know about. And
I think I was going to say, yeah, not just within your church as well. I mean, obviously, I don't know about the situation in the church, but you know, when it's like with at schools, so Skelmanthorpe is a small rural village that is 98% white, and people say, well, we're just, you know, we have a staff that reflects the local population, but that's not the point. Those children are growing up in a global society that is incredibly diverse. So saying, well, just the people immediately around them look the same is not a reason to aspire to that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, be it whether it's within the church or out with, maybe that's something that this church, yourselves, could look for training from outside. Again, as part of your kind of overt statement of your inclusivity, that sometimes, yeah, you have to look further than the immediate, you know, the immediate society.
I'm very aware of time, and we could listen for ages and ages, but we've overshot. Can we just say one last sentence from each of you? What's your greatest hope in terms of inclusion? Proper, unfair end to a panel discussion. No prep, just tell me. So one sentence to say what your greatest hope for inclusion is. Starting at this end, Xavier.
My greatest hope is that the next generation